Dani Moreno, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yes, it's a nice Monday afternoon. We were just commiserating about winding down the workday. Where does this podcast find you? It appears that you're in the Alps, but I am getting the feeling that that's an artificial background.
Yeah, this I actually took during UTMB week. But yeah, it's finding me in Mammoth Lakes, California after a long workday.
Yes. So, quickly, tell me what you do for a living, because this is something I'm always curious about as it relates to professional trail runners. Everybody's sort of, got fun side projects or side hustles, or in some cases, full-fledged incredible careers. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so right now I work as a senior integration manager in construction software technology. And so as we acquire different companies, I partner with them and I help them integrate from an architecture, product, and design standpoint into our product.
Incredible. So is the company, it's not based in Mammoth Lakes, I bet. Are you working remotely?
Yes, it's based in Carpinteria. So I used to live in Santa Barbara before I moved here. And then 2020, like many people, I was able to start working remote. And so that's why I moved here.
Yeah. Okay. So you're already answering some of the questions I had, because I got the feeling, just sort of like flicking through some of your background and through your Instagram and stuff. It seems like you went to school in Santa Barbara at UCSB, where you were a runner. And I was curious how you ended up in Mammoth Lakes. So maybe square that circle for us. Was it a COVID induced, sort of like run for the hills type situation for you?
Yes and no. Like I grew up in LA and, every summer my parents would take us up here and it was just always, one of those highlights is in my childhood to come up here. It always has been kind of a special place for me. And, in high school or college more so, we would do altitude camps. And then post college, I worked as an outdoor guide. And so I'd be up here pretty often or just come up and do like solo camping trips. So it just always has been kind of a catalyst for me for, change in my life and just a constant place for me to kind of fine tune what I'm facing at that point in my life. And so, I tried to move here a couple times, didn't quite work out. And then, I had my tech job. So that tied me to Santa Barbara post college for quite a bit. And then finally, 2020 came around and I asked my partner and he was on board. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome. It feels like a nature meets nurture moment here, coming from the running background, but it seems like you've always been somewhat of an outdoorsy and mountain sport oriented runner, as somebody who spent time in Mammoth Lakes. And you said that you were an outdoor guide. Does it feel that way, that how you've ended up in trail running is kind of the perfect meeting point between high performance running, which you've done for much of your life, and also having this outdoorsy mountain person streak?
Yes, I would say though, like growing up, I wasn't in the outdoors that much because I grew up in LA. And so, the few trips that we did take to the outdoors, I just loved it and embraced it, those few times of year. And then, when I was looking for a college, I was kind of looking for something with a little bit more space compared to growing up in the concrete jungle. So that's what attracted me to Santa Barbara. And then kind of like once I had a driver's license too, I found myself kind of, gravitating more and more to the outdoors.
Santa Barbara, man. We'll get around to talking more about that, because I'm curious about your collegiate career. That's one of the great places in the world, in my opinion. But you're now just like 2 weeks removed from an awesome podium finish at OCC. And I was so happy to see you have just another super strong international performance against some of the best sort of shorter distance trail ultra runners in the world. And I don't know, I just feel like you've quietly really built a solid resume and reputation for yourself in the sport. And that's why I was really excited to have you on the show and get to know you a little bit more. But maybe quickly just tell me how you're feeling a couple weeks removed from that awesome performance at OCC. I know it was a bit of a stretch in the longest race of your career. So how are you feeling physically stepping beyond that ultra marathon distance?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of set in a bit, yeah. And it's just like just whenever I think about it, it just puts a smile on my face, to be honest. Just a lot of years of just, like you said, kind of working quietly, but also intentionally with my coach and just ticking off the boxes at our own pace. And it's just cool to have it pay off, and not just for me, but for everyone that is, either believed in me or said they see potential in me. It feels like it wasn't just me out there that did that. So to do it for everyone that's ever been involved in my career just felt good. And then also it also feeling like not so much the end of an era, but also just going into the next phase of my career. It just felt like a really good jumping off point,
Yeah, awesome. What about physically though? I mean, as somebody who has in recent years sort of built your resume and sort of athletic identity around the sub-ultra distances, does it feel like, are you feeling the physical damage of stepping up in distance a little bit?
Yes, definitely. I'm still
recovery. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm running, but I definitely am still tired. Like my body is moving. But I definitely am feeling it. And yeah, I was kind of just laughing with my coach, just, going into the race too, looking at the profile. And even just 2 years ago, I was like really intimidated by the profile. And so just, going into it and being excited to take on that challenge. But yeah, I mean, the whole last 10, 12K just feels like I blacked out. It was so painful. But I'm also, again, just really proud because I think a lot of that, was training that helped me get through that, just like a lot of back-to-back long runs and stuff. And then again, just really focusing on building that foundation, I think just really helped me that when I, hit those moments and those walls, I was able to face them.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear all about that last 10 or 12K in addition to, the build up for it and all the other stuff that you alluded to, especially about how this is maybe a transition point in your career. But as a relatively recent follower of yours, like I said, I feel like you've quietly had one of the best seasons of any trail runner, certainly of any American trail runner on the international circuit in 2022. And because you have specialized in shorter distance races, it's no secret that the long stuff certainly gets more media attention, especially here in the US. So that's sort of the reason why I really wanted to have you on the show. And I think it's always fun for me, and I think for the audience as well, to get the 30,000 foot view of the people that we have on. So if you don't mind, you've alluded to it a little bit, but maybe just tell us a little bit more about Dani Moreno, the person, your background, both as a human being and with sport, and how you ended up in the sport of trail running.
Yeah. So I guess like, I don't know how back you want to go, but growing up,
you feel is relevant. Yeah.
Okay. Growing up, I played soccer like a lot of trail athletes. I listening to podcasts and getting to know people, I find those sports that allow you to do horizontal movements end up, kind of paying off for trail running. And so I just loved soccer and I loved tricks. So like, moving the ball through your legs and stuff like that, I was really obsessed with that. So I think that kind of paid off. And then also unknowingly, like I would play like on 3 to 4 soccer teams at a time, which now looking back, it wasn't uncommon for me to play like 4, 5, 6 games every weekend. And I just thrived on that. Like I loved that, more like the mental challenge of it, just, finishing a game and having to reset no matter how that last game went. So looking back, I'm sure that has something to do with long distance running. And, growing up, I was never like a sprinter, and I just liked kind of just sitting in that one pace and just kind of grinding it out. So yeah, just did youth track, did high school. High school was a little up and down, with becoming a woman and having to deal with that kind of change in my body and stuff. And so that was a little tough. And then came out the other end of it and ended up choosing UC Santa Barbara because I wanted to run by the beach. And it just was a beautiful place. It wasn't then that I noticed the mountains, but obviously the mountains would become a big part of my life. And my career there was not exactly how I pictured it. It was one of those programs where unfortunately it was like a lot of high mileage and kind of see who survives. And so I barely would squeak by. And so I just dealt with a lot of injuries. But ultimately, came out the other end not so stoked on running. And I ended up taking about a year off or so, mostly just outdoor guiding and doing a bunch of other stuff besides running, and got really into spearfishing, really into climbing, bought a motorcycle, was like doing motorcycle trips everywhere. Yeah.
So are there any sort of childhood sporting experiences or any role models from maybe those soccer days or beyond that you look back at as being highly impactful or influential in the person that you've become? Any sporting heroes or, people who you looked up to that you still sort of remember fondly?
Yeah. As a child, like, I had posters of Mia Hamm because I was really into soccer. Yeah, it was amazing. And just like the USA soccer team, like I really thought like that was going to be my thing. I even played in high school and got recruited for that too, but I ended up choosing running. But yeah, honestly, I was always just more attracted to people in my community. Like I wasn't in a very wealthy community. I just was surrounded by hardworking people and families, and like I just had such strong community ties, I guess. And so I like looked up to like my friends' parents and stuff. Like I just thought everyone was, I don't know, I was just kind of honored to be a part of I keep saying hardworking, but that's really what it was, and just good people. And so I think that really set the tone for what I am inspired by, which is like the people I'm surrounded by. Yeah. So not so many like sports stars. Yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, it's interesting that blue collar mentality and work ethic shines through in you, even though we don't know each other well. I get that vibe from you. So tell me more about sort of like the collegiate running days. I have noticed a theme, people who come on the podcast, of course, many of the guests have run collegiately, but most people, I would say, have had kind of like a less than ideal experience with their collegiate running career. And for whatever reason, didn't give up on the sport altogether, but evolved into sort of the trail and ultra running world. What do you attribute to that maybe theme that I'm touching on in my podcasting experience? And maybe give us a little glimpse into your personal experience at UCSB and how that maybe launched you in the direction that you ultimately took.
Yeah, I think it's kind of in a tough space with collegiate running. Like I think more times than not, like they get a collection of athletes and they want to just get the most out of them, and it's not always so much long term. And yeah, it's just, yeah. And they see who sticks. I think that's what it is. And also, it's the athletes that want to run collegiately too. Like I recognize it in myself too. Like I showed up freshman trial wanting to be an All-American, and I wanted to be the best I could be. And, you're attracted to a program for a certain reason. I was ready to run with girls that were, faster than me and could push me. And so you commit to that hard work, and you're praised when you are kind of just pushing yourself so hard every day. And I think there just should be more praise of, it's more of a push and pull mechanism, not an always push, push, push. And so I think it's just easy to get caught in that. And then, depending on the atmosphere of the team, it like breeds upon itself. You have all these individuals that have that same kind of mindset and aren't being held back. And so we all kind of push each other too far too. Yeah.
So then post collegiately, when you dealt with the year of burnout where you stepped away from the sport a little bit, when you came back to it, was that when you started running mostly on dirt rather than around the track?
Yeah, yeah, I was on the thread that I was never going to run again. I was never going to count miles. Like I was so over it. I was going to like be a mermaid now, just spearfish, eat my own food that I caught, which is all great. I still love that. Obviously I'm not by the ocean anymore, but Yeah, honestly, what it was is I was outdoor guiding. I was doing like outdoor education, and I really love kids, but I found myself just needing to kind of like also have my own space and like do my own thing besides just interacting with them all the time. Again, I love them. I just needed a little bit more time. And so I found myself kind of waking up in the morning and like going on walks. And I was also, kayak guiding at the islands, the Channel Islands. And so started with hiking. I was like, well, maybe I could get a little further if I just jog once I'm at the top. So then I'd hike and then jog. And I was like, well, maybe I can like jog up this hill. And I wasn't tracking anything, but I just found myself, I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool. Because in college we did do hills, but it's always like, this is the training phase of hills and that's it. And then you do the other stuff. And I always liked them because I liked the challenge of it. So yeah, I just kind of like did that. And then, when I would be at home in Santa Barbara, I'd be like, maybe I could go run those trails. Yeah. And honestly, I was a really not safe person. I would not recommend what I was doing. I would always get stuck in the dark. I didn't know where I was going, but also like, I feel like that just connected me that much more quicker to the trails. I just loved them. They felt so wild. And, again, going back to like, I'm not going to track anything. I was like, this is sick. I don't know how fast I'm going. Yeah. So I just loved that.
This makes perfect sense now in hindsight. It's funny, and this is just coming into my head, but like, I'm just kind of trying to think of an analog. And the first person that came to mind was Adam Peterman. And I think this is maybe something that sports marketing people should be doing who are working for various brands in the trail running space. But if you see somebody who has like a kind of a high performance track or cross country background, but who also has maybe an outdoorsy streak to them, like yourself, even if it is spearfishing and kayaking, not necessarily trail running. I don't know, the marriage of both that passion for the outdoors and the talent as a runner creates freaking great trail and mountain runners. And similarly, Adam Peterman, when he was on the show, he was telling me about how he would just go peak bagging with his old man in Montana when he was a kid, and he'd go on these long bike rides, like with Mike Foote and stuff. And it, just like those small life experiences that shape us ultimately touch and influence our athletic careers as well. And I think, in hindsight, you probably recognize maybe a benefit of all those years or maybe that time in the desert that you spent trying to find your love for the sport again. So another thing that's just sort of coming into my head now with Santa Barbara is, of course, that's where the corporate headquarters are for Hoka. And
yeah, that was just luck. Yeah.
So I guess kind of like bring us up to speed there with, sort of getting back into the sport, getting connected with trail running and with the brands that you work with now.
Definitely. And I did forget something, just to backtrack for a moment. In between my sophomore and junior year, I actually lived in Yosemite for 4 months in college. And I remember loving that experience. So then, post-college, I was like, I didn't know this was a thing. So yeah, that was another little, I guess, hint to myself I should have read into earlier. So Deckers and Rabbit, this one is interesting because honestly, I was just extremely lucky, which is hard to say because I know innately, like now I'm a very hard worker and like you make your own luck and stuff. But I really do think it was essentially like I had done a couple trail races in the area. Rabbit had kind of contacted me post college, and I like sort of committed to them in a way because they hadn't even launched yet, like off of I forget what it is, like the funding thing, and they're like, hey, we're thinking about making this apparel. Like, would you just like wear it, if you end up deciding to run? So that was kind of a loose agreement. And then Hoka was actually after like my third trail race, they approached me and it was, do you remember the La Sportiva Mountain Cup?
Yes.
Yeah. So they had a race in Marin and they had pretty good prize money.
Table Rock Challenge, or is that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like, to me at the time, it's still a lot of money, but at the time it was like a lot of money. It was $1,000. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can live off of that for months. And I like had just started kind of running. I was running maybe like once a week. And I told my friends, because I happened to be going to San Francisco that weekend, it just all aligned. This is getting to the Hoka point. But essentially I was like, hey, I'll come with you guys to San Francisco, but I'm gonna like get an Uber and like go do this race. And I remember like 2 days before, I was like, I should run more than 20 minutes. And so I ran 10 miles and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I could run a 25K. Like I've never like raced that far in my life. Like I did 5 and 10Ks. And so I did it and I won. And I was like, that was the craziest experience of my entire life.
Really?
And David Roche was there, now looking back, Maria Dalzot, there was like a few other people that were like very well known in the space. And Hoka like sponsored me after that. And I was just like, whoa, this is crazy. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Unreal.
Yeah.
So I also had Monica DeVries on the podcast a while back. One of my favorite conversations in the history of the pod, I think. Who's of course the founder of Rabbit Apparel.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would maybe provide a little commentary on Monica and her influence on your career, and maybe in what ways that you guys have worked together over the years.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. So her and Jill, in the beginning days, like always talked to me. Like we would meet at this pizza place. And so once I had gotten like I remember my first contract with them were like, okay, we're going to sign you and this other guy in town. Here's like a paper, and like going through this experience, and like, we'd like you to like be officially sponsored by us. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. And obviously it was like a woman-led company, but even back then, like they're just such genuine women. And like, I just believed in them and the direction that what they were trying to do. And innately like seen as a problem and just the vision they had for it. But also, even back then, like they told me they believed in me. They're like, girl, we see you doing the Strava stuff. Like you're going to do really good in this sport, And I was like, cool.
Really? Were you taking crowns all over San Francisco, California? Yeah.
Just like in the Santa Barbara area.
This it speaks to like the change in sponsorship dynamics, doesn't it? It's like you identify the up and coming talent by who's smashing the KOMs on Strava. Keep going now. Yeah.
Well, especially for them because they live in the area. So like they were, Monica has been a trail runner forever. Jill had dabbled in or done trails for a few years too. So they knew what I kind of was doing. So yeah, it was just really cool. And it's been great to partner with them ever since.
Yeah, well, very cool. And I think the type of people who will be great to have in your corner, in your Rolodex as you continue to mature in your career, both in running and in your tech job probably too. I'm sure they could help you with that sort of career development as well. So speaking of Strava, let's talk more about your training. Because I just followed you today on Strava, and I get the sense that you don't put all your workouts up publicly. You mentioned your coach a couple of times, so maybe just give us a glimpse into what you guys work on together, who your coach is, and sort of anything that you think is interesting or relevant to touch on as it relates to your training.
Yeah, definitely. So my coach is Terry Howell, and he's still based out of Santa Barbara. And talk about like meeting a person and just knowing they're a person that needs to be in your life. Like the first time I met him, because I was also part of this like anti-running Dani phase. I never wanted to coach again. I was like, I don't want anyone telling me what to do. And then finally I came around and I was like, okay, I want to coach. And just the first time meeting him, I was at a crossroads in my life, just going through a lot of changes, as a lot of people do post-collegiate, like who am I? What am I doing in life? What should I do next? And he just has always kind of been like that beacon of light for me. He is just so positive and just like a great person, and I think it's really important, especially as runners and athletes in general. Like we're so hard on ourselves. It's like, just surround yourself with good people, but also people that are like good for you. And he just emulates that. And so I've been working with him for pretty much my whole career at this point. And what I really appreciate about him is he's never been selfish with me. Like he's always had my development in mind and has always just given me just a little bit at a time, even when I've asked for more. Like he's always just done like inch by inch, and I could like completely contribute like me building this foundation to his methodology in that standpoint. So yeah, it's been I think when we first started running again, it was like 40 miles, and then over the years I've gotten closer to 50, 60, 70. Now I've been dabbling in the 80s, which is crazy to think because in college I ran 100-mile weeks. And so when I started working with him, I'm like, why am I not getting more mileage? And he's like, you don't need that. Like we need to build this slowly. And then we've also just been learning together too, because he was primarily a road marathon coach. And so just learning like what works for me, and like vert has been something that I've been very slow at developing compared to other mountain runners, I would say. And overall it's always been about keeping me as well-rounded as possible. And like even though my development may be slower than some trail runners because I'm trying to check all the boxes all the time, I think it's helping me to like get stronger and stronger each year. So like it's always a goal that I should be able to run under 16:30. So like that's one aspect of it. And
for
like
5K, you mean?
For a 5K, yeah.
So fast.
Yeah. And then like on like tempos, I should always be able to hit X amount of pace. So if we can keep those like in the framework, then like the mountain stuff fits in between. And so I find that helps a lot.
That's really interesting. So then you keep the speed always sharp and then do the specific mountain stuff. It's funny. I just had Katie Scheid on the podcast. And so this is 2 episodes in a row where a fantastic female ultra runner has articulated the fact that they've reduced volume and had better results as a result. So that's I think a great lesson for our listening audience. Maybe to be a little bit more specific, let's talk about this season and what you guys have been working on in terms of your training blueprint. You started your season with a 10K at the GoPro Mountain Games, and now you've just finished OCC. And of course, you did the Mont Blanc Marathon series and all in between. So maybe sketch the arc of the training progression from that first race, that first trail race back in Colorado in June, I think it was, through the summer, moving from short distance to long distance.
Yeah. So this year was the first time I ever started this late with trail running. I've always done something in the spring, and, some of that was like me wanting to just do some track and faster stuff. Other of it was the fact that I live in snow now and, wasn't able to drive all the time down south just with work and everything. And so, yeah, we did like a track block. And so going into GoPro, I really had no idea where I was, but I knew I felt strong. Like I just felt like with work, I just try to do as much as I can as often as possible, and just I'm nice to myself when I can't. And so everything seemed to be firing. Like I was doing some weight stuff and hill repeats, and like my track speed was still coming over. And yeah, that race was just so nice to have. It felt like I just took a sigh. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a good year. And the whole time we had outlined that it was going to be the races that you said, with OCC being an A race and Mont Blanc kind of being like a check-in point. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to do something faster before Mont Blanc because, as you know, European racing, especially in that sub-ultra distance, is just so fast. So got the legs moving. Mont Blanc, I was just so happy with because that was my first international podium. And I just fought so hard for it too. So it was just very satisfying. It was a lot of back and forth. And like, I know there's like some videos and photos, but I was literally like crying in pain the whole last part to get that podium. And it just felt so earned, which just makes it that much sweeter.
Can't wait to hear all about it. Let's get to that. Maybe to linger on the training question a little bit more. You've mentioned now a couple of times the speed and the track. Talk about the sort of maybe track specifically and its application for trail performance.
Yeah, I find for me, once a track kid, always a track kid. I just feel like it's really a good way to get feedback on your fitness. And I think it just really is good form reinforcement, just gets you to pick up your legs a little bit higher. I find that whenever I do like a big like trail block and I go back to doing something faster, like my arms just feel weird. Like you don't move your arms in the same way.
Yeah.
And so I think it just helps like with those habits, and just it's all overall engagement and different, like different glute engagement, different calf engagement, etc. And yeah, I like the track too.
And you keep it throughout the year, or is it something that you emphasize mostly in the winter months?
Throughout the year, yeah. Like I think going into OCC this year, in between, we might have done it. Yeah, we did it twice. It might not be on Strava, but it was just like another good reminder, like, being able to run 20 miles, like that's probably what's not on Strava, but like doing that at altitude just gives me like that much more confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really want to talk to you about the Golden Trail series, because it's something that I've become a huge fan of. And like a lot of things in the sport, it's bigger in Europe than it is here in the United States. And the races, of course, are sub ultra distance, and therefore, in a lot of cases, just don't get as much of the media shine as I think they should, even though the live streams are absolutely phenomenal. Can you just paint the picture of the Golden Trail World Series and what it's like to take part in it over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's extremely competitive. It's by far, like each race I show up, like you have to show up as your best. And like Sears and I'll being a perfect example, like I was dealing with some like mental stuff and, family stuff. And I don't even know what place I got. I probably got like 20th or something in there. And that's just me being off my game, like it's just so deep and competitive all the time. Like you need to show up ready to go. But for that reason, like it just is such a cool family. I just have created so many friendships within it. And everyone is just, I don't know. I feel like you just see a lot of yourself in them. And for me, like noticing that in individuals that are representing different parts of the world, it just has made me feel even more connected to the trail community. And so that's why I love it. But it's so competitive. I'll just say that over and over again, which that's why I love it. And that's why I decided to do it last year. Yeah. And this year.
And I think one of the big moments of transition in a pro athlete's career in trail running is the first time they go and race in Europe. It's almost like pro cycling, where the courses and the culture and the atmosphere are just different, and it requires a bit of a learning curve. As somebody who's built experience racing over there in Europe, are there any things that you would point to in terms of your learning and development about what makes racing in Europe different?
Yeah, I think it's first off, like I think we have a growing fandom in the United States, but I think there it's just a little older and more established. So that's really cool. And it just seems like wherever you are on the course, like fans are engaged even for these short ones. And so I was explaining this to someone the other day, is like, I'll be in a 30K and I'll be like, what place am I in? And I'll have like 5 or 6 people like yelling at me like, oh, female 5 or female 10, and I just think that's so cool. But another thing I've explained to people is that, like in college or high school, you're like, oh, there's regular season racing and then there's championship style racing. I feel like European racing is always championship style racing. So it's very aggressive. And so with that, I feel like I've been able to build out my playbook a lot more, which has been really cool as far as like different strategies and the way, like in the US, I've always kind of been like a front racer, like very aggressive, like going out hard. And in Europe, I was like, oh, this is different. And so learning to be able to do that and learn from racing in the middle of the pack and the back of the pack and just learning to read profiles more. I think that's all of that is encompassing to my last year and a half of like consistent European racing.
Wow. I really love that articulation of it being championship level racing all the time. Yeah. There's nowhere to hide on the Golden Trail Series.
Yeah.
Sure. There's no easy wins out there. And you spoke a little bit about kind of the camaraderie between the professional athletes on the Golden Trail Series. Of course, this is a theme throughout the sport, but maybe talk about the athletes you've gotten to know and who you look up to. Are there any things about the training or the lifestyle that you've picked up on from your European colleagues?
Yeah, I would say we're all just kind of in different walks of life. It's kind of weird saying this, but like I'm not the oldest out there, but I'm one of the older ones now, which is so weird to think of, who's still focusing on that sub ultra stuff. And so, yeah, it's just so cool. Like, hearing someone who's in school. I have a friend who is an artist and does like art on cycling shoes, and another friend who's doing like stuff at medical stuff. And yeah, it's just recognizing that we're all more the same than different, and in a way that makes it even more fun to be out there, because everyone's just so extremely humble, considering the feats that they're doing outside of running. And I think we all just recognize that like we're all sacrificing something to be there. And so it creates like this extra cohesion.
Yeah. Does it ever frustrate you that the sub ultra distance racing doesn't get as much shine as maybe it should? I mean, that's just my subjective feeling. Right? As somebody who loves watching Mount Marathon and who loves watching the Golden Trail Series races, but it does feel like it's harder to know as much about the athletes who are focusing on that as opposed to Killian and Francois and Courtney and Jim and Tim Tollefson and all the great athletes who focus on the long distance stuff. And especially with how deep and dense and competitive those races are. Is there any sort of maybe frustration or resentment about the fact that it hasn't broken through as much, especially in the US?
Yeah, I would say there definitely is. I've probably tempered myself more in the last couple of years. At first, I just didn't get it because, like, I came from the world of track, where like every event in my opinion, is just so cool, and like the 100 is almost cooler at times, for some people, because it's more relatable than like a 5 or 10K. But, like track overall, like all the events kind of get equal love, which I think is awesome. And so, being in the sub ultra space, yeah, I'm just like, this is cool. Like ultras are really cool, but this is cool in a different way. It's a different style of racing. It delivers its own punches. But yeah, I think it's picking up. I feel like for the average viewer who maybe is new to the sport, like ultras are just so different. And I don't blame them compared to what we already have offered to us in the space of running. Like we have road halves and road marathons, etc. And so you see, oh, trail half, trail marathon, like that's cool. Oh, 50 miles, like that is so different. But I hope that changes, because yeah, I feel like sometimes in the sub ultra space, like we know how hard it is, and it doesn't like get that same love. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's changing slowly but surely. I'm sure Solomon and the Golden Trail Series have all the data to back that subjective feeling up. But I think it's a massive opportunity right now for the sport in general to get behind the shorter distance running, because it really does. I mean, it speaks to the general population in a way that UTMB or Western states never will. And just that it's a lot more approachable, and the stories and the drama of the racing and just the level of the athletes that are taking part in it. It has all the ingredients of being a worldwide phenomenon. So let's talk about your season. And before we go into the specifics, maybe just generally, would you agree that this year has been a bit of a breakthrough for you?
Yeah, I would say so. I think for anyone who has been following me, like it, like maybe isn't too much of a surprise. I don't know. For me, like it just followed the trajectory. But yes, I feel like in the trajectory now, I've like made a jump over a line, which has been pretty cool.
What do you attribute that to?
My coach, and also just me kind of leaning more in and committing more time. Like, again, going back to that space where I like wasn't even sure if I wanted to coach or keep running. Like when he first started coaching me, I was just kind of all over the place too. He had to wrangle me a bit to get me like, no, Dani, like you can't go and spearfish for 5 hours and then expect to have a good workout, those certain things. And so, I would say like in 2019, I kind of started leaning more in, and like 2020 was kind of an interesting year where I was leaning more in because obviously I moved up to Mammoth, but had no way to kind of measure it. And then I would say like last year, I was like, well, all right, let's lean more and more. And so I think just being patient and listening to my coach and really learning from him, I think has helped with that a lot.
By leaning in, what do you mean? Just being more committed, more professional?
Exactly. Yeah. Just, lifting weights and doing injury prevention and just allowing myself to, because I was like this in college, like I was a student of the sport, but I would say now, like I'm a professor of the sport. Like I just read and consume so much and apply it to myself. And I am not scared to fail anymore, which I think has helped a lot. Whereas like before I would tread lightly with things because I wanted that perfectionism to kind of be illuminated. Yeah.
Wow. How do you overcome that feeling? Because people who are perfectionists are often perfectionists in absolutely everything, and they carry it with them for their entire lives. How have you been able to kind of separate yourself from that need to be perfect?
I think just I I think I just like gave myself perspective and looked back and I realized that like I've learned more from my failures, like especially the low moments. And so just it's not that like I want them all the time, but just like not being scared of them, I guess, is when it comes down to it. And sometimes it takes like consistently trying things to see if it's going to work out. But then if it doesn't work out, like you'll learn from it.
Yeah. So let's talk about calendar construction. I just had Katie Schott on the show and we talked about it with her. And I felt that maybe it would be interesting to chat about with you as somebody who focuses on the shorter distance stuff. You mentioned before that you and your coach had drawn up the calendar as it's materialized. In other words, you did the GoPro 10K, you did the Mont Blanc Marathon, you did Sierras and all, and then you did OCC. So maybe just for the listener, provide some context as to how you as a professional athlete sketch that out with your coach and how those races sort of fit together holistically.
Totally. So I'll preface this with when I first started trail racing, I raced way too much. So that is definitely a lesson that I learned pretty quickly, where I just never had gas by the end of the year. And so I would say like going into 2020, I had actually constructed something and obviously that didn't come to fruition. And so what we do is like whenever the calendar comes out, I will take all of the series races and like dump them in a spreadsheet. And then I'll like have some identifiers in the columns. So like date, distance, expected duration, elevation, like I get into all the details. And then from that list, I'll like pick my A races. And so this year, one of the A races is OCC. And so we pick that race and then I'll do like a work back schedule. And again, this is learning from racing way too much. And so kind of like constructing it in a way like that's like a marathon. So you'd want to do like a half marathon, like at like a minimum of 4 weeks before. And so, we kind of looked at, okay, is there a way to get to Chamonix before OCC? Mont Blanc Marathon, that's perfect because I had Golden Trail, like, all highlighted in blue. So I could do that. Okay, unfortunately, I'm going to need 2 more Golden Trail. Or fortunately, dang it, Sierras now. Should we do Sierras now? And then, I went and I did some research. I'm like, well, Ruth Croft and Blondine both ran Sierras now before OCC. We'll give that a try this year and just see if that works for me because I plan on doing OCC again next year. Yeah. So that one like wasn't ideal. So that was more of like, let's see how this goes. And then before Mont Blanc, it was kind of the same concept of like, okay, let's work back 4 to 5 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever we can find. Okay, cool. There's either the Broken Arrow VK or GoPro. Broken Arrow's too close. We'll do GoPro. yeah, so it's kind of a succession like that. And then building in time to recover, I think is really important.
Wow. Very, very interesting. Thanks for walking us through that. So let's talk about the Mont Blanc Marathon because, of course, it's the same weekend as Western States and it
Yeah.
always lost as a result. This is one of my biggest pet peeves in the sport. And I shout it at everybody who will give me the time of day to listen. It's irresponsible for the Mont Blanc Marathon and Lavaredo and Western States to all be on the same weekend. They should be split onto 3 weekends and we would have the ultimate 3-week trail running party.
Yeah.
Sport. Anyway, but it was so cool, kind of as I was getting caught up on things, just being like, bam, American Dani Moreno on the podium at the Mont Blanc Marathon. And to me, as somebody who is a recent follower of yours who doesn't know you personally, it felt like that was like a huge result for you. Talk about that and what led to that amazing result and in what ways has it maybe changed the way you view yourself in the greater context of the trail running community?
Yeah, it was definitely like surreal in the moment. Obviously you're like taking it all in and like that finish line. It is just kind of crazy to be honest, because last year I got fourth in like a golden trail race. And I remember that feeling of like, yes, I'd made the final and I was like, but I wasn't like, I was just that close to like an international podium. And that was like it's like similar to Zagama and Basque Country. And so going into this year, that was like a big goal of mine. It's like, I would really like to get on an international podium. And even thinking back to like years before when I did like some USA races, it was like, I was like top 20. And then the next year I was top 15. And then last year I like got into a top 10, like the first race. And I was like bawling because I was like, coach, we did it. I made it into a top 10 in an international race. And he's like, I'm so proud of you. And it's just so crazy how like, you get into, you're like, okay, what's next? And then, I got into a couple top fives. And so anyways, getting onto the podium, finally, it just felt so good because it was just that progression and to feel like you're just doing what's right for you and like feeling like I had done all the little things and I wasn't taking shortcuts. Like I was doing all the things I needed to do to get there. It just felt so validating, but also just like so happy for like, again, everyone that had supported me. I'm like, see, you guys believed in me. And like, now I get to share this all with you. That was a really cool feeling.
Amazing. You said a little while ago that you now have multiple playbooks that you can draw from. So maybe
draw upon that.
Of those arrows in your quiver, what was the playbook that led to the success that day?
Oh man, this one. Okay, this is a bittersweet moment. So yeah, for those that don't know, like Mont Blanc this year, it like started out with like flat in mountain running terms. It just means that it's runnable uphill for like 10 to 12K. And then there's a very steep ascent, very steep descent. And then you do more climbing up to La Flégère. And then you have one last descent, which that was new this year. Usually they just end at the top. And so we had no concept of time. And so the week of the race, everyone's kind of guessing. And I, looked at the profile a lot of times with my coach. And I was like, you know what? If people aren't ready if they burn themselves on that downhill, then they might not have climbing legs for that whole last part, which is actually, you're like at halfway point of that race. Mm-hmm. So if you burn your legs, you still have like over 2 hours of work. And so, I was kind of like in the top 6 going up the climb. And then I think I like came in at like 9th and I got to the bottom and I trusted myself, but also I was like, I really hope this works out because I had so many people flying. Oh no, I was in 4th and moved back to 9th. That's what happened. So I got passed by like 5 people.
Passed you on the descent.
And they're flying. And like, I love descending. And I knew, I was like, just hold back. It'll work out. And again, this was just from racing last year. I had done a similar thing in the final where I let some people go on like the steepest descent. And then I just got to the bottom and just let's go to work. And I just like started hauling butt. And just climb, climb, climb. And I was like, this is going to work out. This is going to work out. Trust, trust, trust. And, starting to go up from Argentière. I think this was before we got to Les Leger. I was like, oh yes, there's a person. Oh my gosh, here's another person. And like, I was just moving so much quicker that I was like gaining confidence from that. Yeah. And then, me and Fourth, like basically the whole downhill, or there's like this part where it's kind of runnable. We were going back and forth, and she's amazing. Her name's Anaïs Sabrier. Yeah. And I was like, she is not letting up. And so I just kind of like put an extra gas on the downhill. And nutritionally, I probably should have eaten more looking back, because then I started getting tired. And then she came out of nowhere with like, I don't know, it probably was like just over a mile to go. And I was like, what the heck? But also just like, you go, girl, but I'm going to get on this podium. Like, I've not like worked this hard to lose now. And I just hauled, and the video says it all, but I'm leaning so forward because I have nothing left. I'm just going up purely off of gravity. Yeah. And I think I beat her by like
that 16:30 5K comes in. Thanks, coach.
I think it was like 5-minute pace the last 800. Like, I was just going as fast as I possibly could. That was a good feeling.
Wow. And just tactically, just going back to the question I asked you, I mean, what a great moment in your career. What a great learning experience to have that trust to let those women blow past you on the descent and gain all that time back and more on the remainder of the course. On a practical level, this is one of the things that I'm curious to hear you talk about, is the travel component, because you do have a real job, and it seems like you have to bounce back and forth now between home and Mammoth Lakes, California, which is not an easy place to travel to and from, and various locations on the European continent. That could be seen as a fairly big disadvantage, I feel like. And you sort of alluded to the fact that maybe that had something to do with the fact that Sierras and all didn't go great. So just wherever you want to go with that, the travel involved with racing on the Golden Trail circuit while also having to maintain your normal life here in the US.
Yeah, it's hard, just like straight up. I found that there's like two things I learned last year. One, I need more than 3 days. Like, I don't know, there's some people that could show up like 3 days before and they're golden. And I am not one of those people. Yeah. So I'm the same. I need like a week, ideally, if I can get a few more days, cool. Like, I've gotten lucky with some holidays, like national holidays sometimes. Yeah. But what I try to do is I'll leave the weekend before, like either the Friday night after work or Saturday, so that I get there on Sunday, and then I have that week to, settle in. But I actually like work a lot over there. And so, like, for example, Mont Blanc, I think I got there. I left straight from Colorado because, like you mentioned, like Mammoth is not easy to get to, like with Reno especially. And so since I was already going to Colorado, I just left straight from there to Mont Blanc. So I was able to get there a little bit earlier. And so I worked like pretty much every day until 2 days before the race. And that's tough because I work mostly up until like midnight or 2 a.m. So yeah, it's one of those things that it is what it is. So work with it, not against it. I just have to adjust my sleep for a couple days. And then as long as I could give myself a couple of days to, get on the schedule. So waking up at 6 a.m. isn't alarming. It is what it is. So yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. And I guess the best thing is, to not work against it, not let it get in your head, and just deal with it. So maybe provide a little bit more color as to Sierras and all. It seems like you've learned something from that disappointing performance. What are the things you learned?
Just I am human like everyone else. I lost someone really close to me like a couple of weeks before the race, and had to actually share a name with them. And it just was someone very, very important to me. Mm-hmm. And just a pillar in my family, just going back to that community. Like I adore my family. We love each other. I was very lucky because of that. And so when we lose someone, we all feel it collectively. And so the services were the week of the race, and Looking back, I'm just like, Dani, you should have lowered your expectations. But in true Dani fashion, I was like, no, I can do that. I could compartmentalize it, and then I can race. And what I ended up doing is I just found myself kind of anchoring myself as a rock for my family. And I grieved, but I didn't like fully let go. And, I felt like I was kind of like holding it all in. And then I was like, just make it to the race. And then I got to the race and I was like, I am not okay. The race starts and you're in it. And, usually like what's it called? I'm very much like a mental runner. Like I feel like I can push a lot, and I just got to the hard parts in the race and I just like had nothing to give. I was exhausted. So yeah, that was a tough one for me because Sierre-Zinal, it's a race I've been waiting to do for years, but at the same time, like, being there with my family was just so more important. And so I had to reset after that, going into OCC. And so that's actually what made OCC so much sweeter is, going through grief, and being able to show up. Yeah.
Beautiful. So maybe keep going with that. The bounce back, it was only 2 or 3 weeks between Sierre-Zinal and
10 days, I think.
10 days. You did not come home in between those 2 races, did you?
Yeah, no. No.
So talk about the bounce back there, because of course, after disappointing performances, oftentimes we get negative with ourselves psychologically. It's hard to believe that we can perform to our expectations again, especially at one of the world's most competitive races like OCC. How did you adjust your mindset to set you up for success at OCC?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is I was flooded with love, from my family, my friends, and colleagues in the running space. And it just, it made me feel just incredibly grateful, that we get to do this thing and be in these places. And I felt like for me, I definitely took a couple days to sulk in it for sure. And in the end, this is partially because of this person, but their life just meant so much to me. And I was like, you know what? Like, we need to celebrate this damn thing and like go into this race. Like my goal was always to podium, but essentially it was like, go have as much fun out there as possible. Like all these people are going to love you no matter what. And, part of Sierre-Zinal, I felt like I'd let people down. And like going into OCC, I was like, if you could just cross that line with like a finish, like a smile on your face, and you had a good time. And like, this was the first time running that far and this distance. I was like, just take in the experience. And as the race develops based on like the plan that we put in, like if it comes to fruition, like it was meant to be. And so, I just like took the steps towards that, which was really, really nice. Yeah.
So maybe to ask you the playbook question again, of course, OCC was the longest race of your career, only the second time doing a 50K. And it's a hard freaking race.
Yeah.
So what was
so funny.
What was the playbook that led to this awesome podium?
It was so something that we've been adopting more so this year is gaining confidence throughout the race. So that's how I raced Mont Blanc, because as I catch people, like I kind of just fuel off of that. And so going into OCC, going in humble, I mean, this was the first time I've ran that far and this long, like by far, and going in with an open mind and just, the plan was, it's like a short climb. Don't waste climbing legs on that. That is just the beginning. So that was the part there. Just enjoy it. All of it was enjoying, but yeah, just power hike as much as possible up to Champagne. And then the next 2 climbs to like see how the field is doing, like a pulse, no matter like what place I was in. And so on the climbs, I would push a little bit and see like who was going with me. And so that was very intentional. And then on the downhills, like almost like recovering. Because again, I love downhills and I love smashing downhills, but I just have learned, at least for where I am in my career right now, like just saving the legs a little bit more so for the transitions and like crescendoing into the crux of the climbs instead of like attacking the climbs from the bottom. And so it was kind of just like, I'm also, I love music. And so like, to me, it was kind of like an orchestra, like building and letting it go, crescendoing and like letting it be like a soft build into each thing.
Whoa.
Sorry. Yeah.
Orchestrating a symphony out there in the Swiss and French Alps.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, Dani. So, I mean, I think that is a brilliant thing. Everything that you just said is so smart and I think deserves to be highlighted, because I think the transitions between the uphills and the downhills are a underrated moment in every race, because especially in the professional fields, like people, when they get to the bottom of the climb, they carry that momentum too hard from the descent instead of letting their climbing muscles turn back on and build into the climb and crescendo, to use your words. They, burn the extra matches at the bottom, just trying to carry the momentum. And also just taking the downhills a little bit easier, just going back to, how I've always raced, and especially at Hard Rock last year, I think that was absolutely the thing that helped me the most. Was I just ran all the downhills super easy because I knew there was so much downhill and I wanted to be able to hike strongly the last couple of climbs. And I think that's just brilliant. So I think wasn't it also like Mont Blanc Marathon where you didn't come into third place until kind of the bitter end?
Yeah. And like to your point exactly too, with the downhills, like you have to be pretty good at downhills for like something to feel easy, right? Like compared to what might be racing for other people. So I think that's important to note too. But I totally agree with the transitions, and like that actually like is my coach now, but also my high school coach taught me that, which is just so cool. Yeah. So the plan the entire time, we looked at the profile and we decided the new climb in the middle. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but there was a completely new middle section.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that part, like, if you look at it, it looks like it's up and then kind of runnable, but I was actually able to run that the in between weeks, and it's quite technical. Like there's some really steep drop offs, very, very narrow single track, a little bit of boulder hopping, and it's a slight climb still the entire time. So if you like burn your legs on those two climbs going into going after Champagne and then Trient, like that's like 90 minutes of racing right there, where you can just feel like death and the race can change. And so I just remember going into Trient and, doing the crescendos or whatever, and like asking how far the podium was. And people are like, it's pretty far, like it's 15 minutes. And I was actually just so content. I was like, okay, 15 minutes, I can do that, And that to me, again, is just experience racing, especially the last couple year and a half, where if you had told me that like 3 years ago, I would have been like, all right, no podium today. But just like knowing what was left too, I was like, I can do this. And so going after Trient, we had planned that would be the move, the move to push me into the podium and then gut it out. And yeah, I told my coach, I think that's some of the best climbing I've ever done. Like I just felt so in rhythm. I felt like we did a lot of back-to-back long runs, and I just felt that really coming in, where it was uncomfortable, but it was very familiar. Like it was a discomfort that I had gotten used to. And I just like started eating up, that middle part of the field, which was really cool. It was like 10th, 9th, 8th. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And made it up to the Col de Blanc, and then I was in 4th, and I felt good. Good for where we were in the race.
Yep.
And then descended, kind of saw 3rd for a second. She's a very strong descender. She ended up 2nd, Nuria Jill. And I think we were probably, because it's a long downhill, I think we were like 4 or 5 minutes apart once we got to the bottom, maybe 3 or 4. And then you cross and you go to Argentière, and then it just started to get hard, but I'm sure it's like, you just tell yourself, you're like, just move faster. Like, you don't need to be moving the fastest.
Yeah. Just go faster.
Just go slightly faster than what your body wants to do. And I just told myself, just run as much as possible. And eventually, I moved into third right before La Flagère, like that climb. Yeah. And I was in such a dark space, but I just was hyper focused, and I was like, you're in a 55K. Like, I knew that was going to happen. So that was completely new territory for me. And yeah, I think at that point I was like 2.5 minutes from Nordia, who was second, got to the top, and then ended up being like a minute by the bottom. So made up some ground.
Close. Super close. So maybe you've alluded to it a couple of times, but provide an illustration of the suffering that ensued in the final 10K, the weeping, the cursing, any detail that you can add.
I just, like, I don't know if this happens to you, but I find the more pain I'm in, the more hyper focused I get. And I just notice the craziest little things, like in the ground, especially if you're going uphill, because you're just like para hiking and you're in this weird flow state that's also like painfully therapeutic. And I just remember like looking at grains of sand as I was going up, and I was like, just make it to the top. That's your final aid station. And going back to this being like my first long race, like I definitely made a mistake up there. Like I should have taken more time, and I'm not beating myself up about it. I'll just fix it next year. But yeah, that was definitely something looking back. I'm like, yep, probably should have eaten and drank more water, because then that last descent was much longer. It's different than the Mont Blanc Marathon. And I just remember this gentleman running with me with a GoPro, and he's like, come on. And I was just like, dude, I might look okay, but like if I fall, I don't know if I'm going to get back up. Yeah.
Well, you made it.
I made it. Yeah.
For an incredibly impressive, proud podium performance at your longest race ever, your first OCC. And yeah, just another great mark on your resume and a great place to continue to build from. So congratulations for that. So looking forward a little bit, I was just making my fantasy picks for the Pikes Peak Ascent and the Flagstaff SkyPeaks race. And we were talking about the Golden Trail Series earlier in our conversation. What's ahead for you in the rest of the season? I noticed you weren't at the Pikes Peak Ascent. I was sad to see that, but you were signed up for Flagstaff. So tell us what's ahead for you.
Yeah, so we're doing Flagstaff. I probably wouldn't be doing it if Sierra Zanelles didn't go as it did. But I still want to be competitive in the final. So if I want to do that, I should take that third race. But yeah, we're really shifting to the final. It's a 5-day stage race, and I do plan on doing like a longer distance next year after OCC, and then it'll be like OCC something longer, and then I'll be done. And so we're seeing this as like a good stepping stone to have, I don't know, somewhat of an ultra experience maybe. Yeah. And yeah, I'm just really excited about it. So yeah, I'll do Flagstaff, the stage race, and then I'll finish out the year or be done.
So are you automatically qualified for the final already, or do you need a certain performance at Flagstaff in order to get to Madeira?
I am qualified, but I'm telling myself I'm not, because I don't want to race like that. Yeah. On paper, I am, though.
Well, cool. Well, then maybe last question for you. You just teased it a little bit, and we've lamented the fact that everybody's always talking about the longer distance stuff in trail running, but I have to admit it's where my passion is too, even though I love, as a fan, following the sub ultra stuff and everything that you do. How do you envision the long term for your career as somebody who's taken a really patient and methodical approach to how you've constructed everything thus far? And how are you thinking about the potential step up to the longer distance races?
Yeah, that's I am excited about it. It's like the first part of next year will still include like a lot of sub ultras, and probably the next years after that. I just, going back to, I just love that racing, like it is very much methodical and intentional, but also I just love being out there for like 2 hours or less than 3 hours. It's aggressive. It's fun. You kind of just like throw yourself off of stuff that maybe you wouldn't in other situations that are time pressing. So yeah, I'll definitely still include those, but I had like, it's hilarious, I think. But when I first signed with Hoka, they said, what are you going to race in the next year? And I was like, oh, I'll probably do like Western states or something. And 5 years later, I still haven't done it. But yeah, next year. So OCC, I'm either going to do one or for sure next year, maybe even the third year. Because something about me, like, again, going back to the ultra thing, I think it's really cool when people are able to get in like the top 10 of Western, like years in a row. Like that is so impressive. Yep. But like to me, a really cool goal is like, can I get on the OCC podium 3 years in a row? Like, I don't know if that's been done. Like, it's just like to have that much focus on that 55K distance, I think would be cool. But next year I'm looking at, what's it called? Les Templiers, like after OCC.
That is a race. That is such a cool race. I tell everybody I know about it. I did it in 2016. It was one of the worst performances of my career. And I loved the race. Like,
I love that.
I absolutely recommend it. It's sort of like the TNF 50 of France, the old North Face 50 Mile Championship. It's a big deal in France. It's always super competitive. There's the big prize money on the line. And it's also kind of has the vibe of like the end of season party. It's a fantastic event. Les Templiers is a must-do thing for everybody who's listening. So
100% agree. I mean, I've looked at YouTube videos a couple of years now. I was like, that's the one I want to do.
That's really smart too. I think just from a calendar construction perspective, like we were talking about earlier, it's good timing, based on the fact that you do plan to return to OCC, use that as a strength and endurance builder for when you then step up to about 50-mile distance, which is the important race at Les Templiers, or the most competitive race at Les Templiers, is about 80K. So that's really smart, Dani. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks.
Well, yeah. I think that's about all the questions I had for you. It's been super, super duper fun to get to know you a little bit more as somebody who is a recent follower and now a new big fan of you. Congratulations on an awesome season that you've had so far in 2022, and good luck with Flagstaff and the World Final Golden Trail Series in Madeira.
Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you. So I appreciate it very, very much so.